Welcome back to Open Heart. On today's episode, we're joined by a dear friend of mine and somebody who inspires me to show up in the world as the fullest expression of myself. We have Dr. Rosie Thatchell, critical care cardiologist, academic physician, leader in professional societies, and also someone who's deeply embedded in the administrative part of healthcare. She recently received her MBA from Wharton. She does a lot of work in terms of administration and medicine, delivering healthcare in the most efficient and safe possible way. She also even has done work in political advocacy. If you think you've seen it all, you have not met Dr. Rosie Thatchell, so let's get into it. So first and foremost, you are a critical care cardiologist. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is? Because it is a field that a lot of people don't really know about.
Yeah, absolutely. So critical care cardiology, it's a fairly nascent field. It's the practice of cardiac ICU, cardiac intensive care. So really those cardiac patients that are sometimes end of life or very critically ill, right? Whether that is after a heart attack or after severe heart failure, valve disease, really the spectrum of disease that is severely sick of cardiac origin. And so it's usually a confined space, just like any other ICU in the hospital. And certainly it's a very interdisciplinary space, and it's high risk, high reward, right? It's a very sort of charged, high acuity atmosphere. So there are days you go home exhausted, but then there's other days you go home feeling extremely rewarded.
I love that you mention interdisciplinary in connection with critical care cardiology.
hmm
Tell me more about this. What does this mean to you?
So interdisciplinary is an interesting word, right? I think in medicine in general and life in general, it's a team sport, right? You're not acting by yourself. In the ICU, it's so you have a village of people that are taking care of the patient. Sure, I may be the attending of record, but there's residents, there's fellows, there's nurses, there's techs, there's respiratory techs, there's chaplains. There's just such a village that comes together to take care of just one patient. And I think that's sort of there's a parallel to be drawn with life there, right? Because life, we don't live it in silos. We live it in the context of who we're around, the company we keep, and the people we choose to have in our life. So I think really interdisciplinary is an important word.
And I do think, with your path and your purpose, so you take care of the sickest of the sick patients. And you also have this beautiful background in things that most doctors have no idea about. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey of becoming this person who's now got an MBA? You work to lobby for things that are important for medicine and the future of healthcare. Can you tell us how you became that person? Because I find it so inspiring.
I think when I was in medical school, one of the things I cared about was systems change. I think medical school training really puts us on this trajectory to become great clinicians. It trains us to be great healers, great clinicians, great academics. But I always, in the back of my mind, always thought about how can I change systems for patients and for physicians. My medical school had a program where you could actually take a year and go do an MBA, but I think it was between your second and third years. At the time, I sort of deferred that because I thought, oh, I want real work experience. So for me, the MBA was actually something of a deferred dream that I was always going to go back and do at some point. I didn't know when that point was going to be, but I think after about 4 or 5 years in practice, I found that I had enough sort of credibility and experience to say, hey, I know the things that need to be changed now. And so now I'm going to go get that degree. And that degree is going to give me a different language, the language of finance and management, and also equip me with some leadership skills that I can use to sort of create that change I want to see.
This is such an important message because so many of us in medicine, we identify areas where we're like, man, I really wish that this could improve. But very few of us take it upon ourselves to say, hey, you know what? I have translatable skills that I can apply in other areas to actually impact meaningful change.
Yeah.
What's unique about you that, gave you that courage or that push to pursue your dreams? And I love that you call them deferred dreams, and we'll have to come back to that.
Yeah.
But what is it about you that gave you that courage or that knowing that this is the right thing for me to do?
So I think in medicine, there's a lot of groupthink, right? If we're sort of given this playbook of what we're supposed to do and stick to it. And sometimes if you color outside the lines, people are kind of like, why'd you do that? Or why are you doing that? Actually, even when I applied to Wharton for my degree, people were like, why are you going to go do that? Like, you don't need that. You're on this academic track. Like, why would you go and do that? So I think To be honest, the courage comes from just knowing where your identity lies and not caring what people think, right? And I think that's easier for me to do now than when I was a medical student.
What
It's
shifted between now and then?
I think confidence and experience, right? At some point, you have some years of experience on your CV. You start thinking critically and thinking for yourself outside of just what your mentors and sponsors may say. And at that point, you sort of build up that courage to say, "I'm going to do this," and it doesn't really matter what people think or even what your mentors think sometimes.
I really love that concept of like deep self trust and introspection, really knowing who you are. And really, it's trusting your intuition. It's like you know what's right for you. Nobody else really has that same inner gut feeling or knowing, right? And I feel like that also applies to so many things that we do in medicine. But so many of us will trust the clinical intuition, but we will not trust the intuition that comes to us in our daily life. We've gotten so good at the physical forms of medicine. I think we've gotten so incredibly skilled at treating physical problems. But medicine started as both an art and a science. And I think the art part of it is not something that you learn necessarily from a textbook, but we've just not had the conversation. So that's why I love having these conversations on Open Heart. It's almost like, how do we bring the art back into medicine, but also into our own lives?
Yeah. And part of that art, I think, for me, both inside and outside the hospital, is vulnerability,
Yeah.
right?
Say more about that.
Um, it's interesting, right? Because vulnerability is, I think, growing up and even in my early career, I always saw it as kind of a something to stay away from, right? In medicine, we are taught to project strength, to project sometimes like an authoritarian sort of aura. But the truth is, vulnerability is true power because if you can tell a story, right, whether it's with a patient, a friend, if you can tell a story, a vulnerable story, that will often create change in that person. And so I've learned that vulnerability is a strength, and it's something I have to work on because I'm not good at it. Especially in the hospital setting, I'm not good at it. I think I'm good at it with friends, perhaps, but in the work setting, I almost feel like if I share too much, people will think I'm less of a physician, less of a professional. Um, I think I've shared this with you before, but in my early career, I wrote this article for Medscape on
Yeah.
imposter syndrome and how I would walk into a room and then there's 5 foot me, right, who's still getting carded at restaurants, and I didn't feel like a cardiologist. And I wrote about this very publicly on Medscape, and I got such great feedback. But I also got a few sort of, messages like, "Hey, this is too vulnerable. This is too open. Why would you share this? You're diminishing yourself." So I think that's changed a little bit. I think that was now 5 years ago, maybe. But I think owning that vulnerability and owning your story is just so powerful.
And I believe that we each have our own unique story for a very specific reason. It's almost like our soul came here with all of these gifts, and everybody has different sets of gifts, different ways of looking at the world. And I feel like we all have that for a reason. And so if we suppress part of ourselves or we hide part of ourselves, are we really living to our fullest extent?
Yeah.
And do we really reach our maximal impact in the
Yeah.
world whenever we have to put ourselves into a box that may not fit us?
It's a constant work for me. I think it's a work in progress for me to be vulnerable at work, but I think I've gotten better at it.
It is for me too. I really struggle with it. And, it's kind of ironic that I'm sitting here on the set of a podcast called Open Heart and sharing all these things because if you talked to me 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been the most tight-lipped person ever. And
Yeah.
it really came from a place of the same thing. It's the conditioning that we have growing up. It wasn't safe to speak or show up fully as yourself, right? Because, we both come from first generation immigrant families. And for my family, there was no material safety, there was no social safety. It was really like you're just here on an island trying to make ends meet and figure it out. And so deviating from normal was seen as a risk, right? And I do believe that that experience of going through life has shaped us into who we are now to the point where we're like, hey, vulnerability is actually cool.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I think in the immigrant experience, vulnerability is something you gotta hide. There's some sort of shame associated with it, right? Like
Why is
protect
that?
I don't know. I think you come to this country, you don't feel like you belong, and sharing your vulnerabilities, it's not seen as a source of power. But the funny thing is, when I hear immigrant stories, even my own, technically, I came to this country when I was 8. I find them so inspiring, especially these like rags to riches stories, or stories of resilience where people have overcome such incredible things in their life, whether it's trauma, poverty, abuse. I think those stories are so inspiring, yet people try to cover those up because they don't see that as power.
And also, it's like if we don't share our human experience, we never know who else has that same experience or who will benefit from hearing the words that we share or who
Yeah.
has a story that will then come back to us in some way. And I think it's really hard because when we do put ourselves out there in a vulnerable way, we don't always see the impact. The ripple effect is always there, but we don't always see it. I think the other topic is vulnerability with patients, vulnerability with colleagues. It's kinda like, where do you draw the line? Like, what is there a right line, or is this a very dynamic thing where it takes a lot of deep connection and emotional intelligence to be able to help people to the fullest extent possible?
It depends on the patient and the dynamic for sure. But I have found that being a little bit more vulnerable, saying, "Hey, I went through this with my family also." Right? In the ICU, you deal with these family dynamics, right? End of life situations, high acuity, critically ill situations, where oftentimes if you share a story, "Hey, I went through this with my grandmother," or if this was my parent, my grandparent, this is what I would do. I think adding that human element always makes it easier. It always decreases the temperature in the room. It sort of, I think sometimes there's this like the physician's up here and the patient, the family are down here feeling. And the instant you bring in vulnerability and humanity, you kind of level that.
It's the great
And yeah,
equalizer.
it really is an equalizer. And so I think the conversations become more easier when you introduce vulnerability into those dynamics, those family discussions.
I think it's also a powerful reminder that we're all just people. At the end of the day, there is no superhero in the room. We are all just people going through the experience of being a person.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all human.
Yeah.
Whether we're a physician, a patient, a nurse, what have you, we're all people.
I also think that, sometimes the greatest lessons come from really big experiences. I've had patients who've had cardiac arrest, and can you believe that I had a patient who came into the ER with a diagonal STEMI and had a VFib arrest, which does not, people say people don't die from diagonal branches. And so for the audience who's not in the
Yeah,
medical field,
yeah.
this is a small branch coming off of a main vessel. Most people say, don't worry about the side branch. It's not a big deal. But this person had a blockage in a side branch that then caused a fatal heart rhythm, and we had to resuscitate this person, and he went through this really, really big experience. Thankfully did well, and then the next day I go to talk to him, in the ICU once he's, fully awake and, able to conversate, and as I'm walking up to the room, the patient is on the phone with his friend, and keep in mind, this patient is a farmer. He's a great
Yeah.
guy, works really
Mhm.
hard, really big personality. He's on the phone with a friend, and he's like, "Hey, man, guess what? I died last night," and he was cracking up, and it's
Oh
just
my
like it's
gosh.
kind of cool to see that element
Mhm.
of human resilience because
Yeah.
people can go through these really big, big things, but at the end of the day, like, we're all people and we navigate life with the same tools. And it's like, why can't we bring in that same, like, you know, emotion and joy and all the experiences that we have? Like, do you think that there's a place for that?
100%. And I think part of it is it's not modeled for us in medical education. It's interesting you asked me this because a few weeks ago I had co-moderated a webinar for the Society of Critical Care Cardiology, and it was about humanity in the CICU. And what's interesting and what was brought up is that humanity is very hard to teach. Humanity and vulnerability is very hard to teach. You have to model it, but there's no curricula for it, right? It's really behavioral. And so I do try to model that for my trainees and for people I'm teaching, but it's hard because there's no playbook for it.
I love that you bring that up because a lot of medicine is this form of apprenticeship. There's a limited amount that we can learn from reading a textbook or reading a review article or, searching the internet, but there's so much that happens when you're in that space. And it takes me back to this concept of how do we just know how to function within a team, especially in the situation of a heart attack, right? You're doing a case, you're moving very quickly. Same thing in critical care, whenever you have to make that split second decision of escalating mechanical circulatory support, knowing how the team just will kind of come and take care of the patient all in harmony, all at the same time. What do you think results in that harmonization? Do you think it's training? Do you think it's unspoken energetics? Do you think it's something else?
I think it's culture,
Yeah.
right? Because I think you have to cultivate a culture of team where everyone is valuable to the team, right? Let's say you're running a code, right? You have a code team, you have the ICU team, you have the nurses, you have the physicians, you have the techs, you have the residents, and everybody kind of knows what part they're supposed to play. And so I think when you have that culture of team, we're all working towards a shared goal to resuscitate this patient or to stabilize this patient. I think that's what makes it work. And every person has to feel like they're valued and part of the team. And I think that's the job of an effective leader, right? They can make every single person feel like they're valued and part of that team, no matter where they are on the so-called hierarchy.
What is your number one tip for somebody starting early on this journey, or even for someone really seasoned? What is one tip that you think will really help people become more confident leaders and more effective leaders in the space of healthcare, especially as a clinician?
So I think leaders create more leaders, right? So leaders look at other people and they find the strengths within each person. Leaders don't create more followers, they create more leaders. And for me, one of the biggest hacks for me has been finding mentors and sponsors who understand me. I read somewhere, the best mentors don't try to make you like themselves, they try to make you the best version of yourself. And I'm really fortunate that the mentors I've had in my career, even if I came to them with kind of sounds like an out of the box idea or initiative, they didn't ridicule me, they didn't belittle me. They kind of just said, try it out, see what happens. And so I think you need those people that are going to entertain your interesting ideas, not put you down. And I think that helps you rise as a leader. And then you pay that forward to other people, right? So when people come to me for advising of any sort, I hear them out and I don't try to make them like myself. I don't force people to go into critical care cardiology. I don't force people to go into to get an MBA, whatever it is. I try to figure out what it is that feels natural for them and to kind of run with that.
I just love everything you just said. I think there's so much wisdom contained in that. And that's true for my story too. I actually just came back from Austin having dinner with my mentor and friend, and we kind of bounce ideas. And he was the first person to show up whenever I decided to make big life changes. I was like, hey, guess what? I'm going to yoga teacher training. He's like, okay, that's something new to integrate into whatever you're doing. And consistently being supportive as you grow into the full expression of the person that you're supposed to be in this life. But where does it come from that people sometimes, we talked a little bit about this. They're always going to be the people who have opinions that are kind of contrary to your path without fully understanding. Why do you think that happens? Where does that come from? Because I think we do have a lot of that in medicine where I don't know if it's necessarily intended with an ill intent, but I think there's a culture in which people have become very reactive, defensive, and there's a lot of mistrust among colleagues even.
Yeah. Well, I do think it goes back to that groupthink that we develop in training. And we're all sort of cooked in that culture, right? And so when you see somebody do something different, I think the gut reaction might be, that's strange, or why are they doing it? Instead of curiosity, which should be, hey, let me learn from that person. They're doing something different. Let's see how this plays out. Maybe they can learn from them. So I think it's some of that medical groupthink that we have. Although I will say, I think with social media, it's changed a little bit because now you can see the full spectrum of things people are dabbling in, and you can draw inspiration from that. So I'm hoping that that sort of changes, but I think that's where it's rooted in, right? Medicine is a industry and profession steeped in tradition, for better or for worse, right? I think there's a lot of pros to that, but I think the downside is sometimes there's such strong groupthink that it's almost like hard to stray from the pack without feeling like you're ostracized or
And we
made to.
all want to be part of the
Yeah,
pack.
yeah, isn't that
Oh my
funny?
gosh, yeah. So when
Yeah.
I was a fellow, like I would go to dinners for, interventional cardiology, whatever. And as a woman, the only woman in the room, I would often just be the first person there sitting at the table by myself. And the second my mentor sat with me, the table just filled up.
Yeah.
And it's amazing the impact of just one person kind of being on that same degree of resonance, just kind of making space for you or showing up for you in a certain way can help you feel so much more confident in showing up. And I think it comes also back to the whole idea of mentorship. I feel so deeply connected to mentorship, even if it's in an unofficial capacity. I feel like that is the way to pay it forward. That is our way to leave an impact in the
Yeah.
world and shift culture, really.
Yeah. I want to double click on that a little bit. So you're a woman interventionalist, which, what is it,
Woohoo!
5%
So
of
5%,
interventional cardiology?
yeah, 5% general intervention and less than
Yeah,
1% for structural intervention. Isn't that
man,
crazy?
that's insane.
And I never thought I would be a structural interventionalist. And the reason I did it was because my mentor made space for me. And it wasn't based on, oh, you're a man or you're a woman. It was purely a meritocracy. It's like this person shows up, they consistently, put in the effort, they care about what happens to the patient, so I will create space. But I was scared to show up in my first TAVR room because the room is full of people and nobody wants to give up their little spot,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Do you feel like as you were training and doing your interventional training and now in practice, do you still feel like you deal with the microaggressions? Because I can imagine in the cath lab space, the interventional space, that's not an easy thing to deal with.
I was a little bit nervous about traveling. So my first job, I think I was there for long enough to kind of establish relationships with people. And initially, you're kind of met with skepticism because you're not what's known to them. And I tend to be a butterfly. Like I'm one of these people who's very happy-go-lucky, and I love learning about people. And so I think that personality alone is very different for the cath lab. I think it's not as common for people to want that deeper connection. And I don't know why that is, because I do think that there are male colleagues who have that in them, but I think there's also an element of just whatever it is, it's just personality, the nurturing, whatever it is that comes with us. And so initially it's skepticism. And then you get through a couple of really tough cases together and they're like, okay, this is cool.
Yeah.
And then you build these like really cool lasting bonds and relationships. And I realize now that I travel for work that as I travel, it's always going to be the same flow. And I do think we get a little bit more skepticism than a male colleague who kind of looks like the interventional cardiologist and fits the personality mold. But at the end of it, I always have people tell me that we're so grateful that somebody actually wants to hear what we think. And that's my biggest takeaway from this, because there was a time when I was like, okay, if I have an openness to learning from other people at the table, say that they're techs or nurses, will that make me look incompetent? And I had that kind of nagging fear of like, okay, if I show the vulnerability of saying, hey, anybody else in the room have any ideas? Because oftentimes you'll have techs that have 30 years of experience. They know their lab better than anyone. And I started kind of making that my practice. And because of it, I feel like we have a much more harmonized team. We're very respectful. And at the end of the day, you make the decisions as a physician. And so I think creating that safety and communication has helped me. It's helped patients. But initially, it's always skepticism followed by this like interesting
Yeah.
unraveling of all the layers. And then
Yeah.
we become a really cool, cohesive unit.
That's a great leadership nugget you just brought out, right?
Leadership nugget.
Because you're saying every person on the team, their voice matters,
Yeah.
and creating that culture and psychological safety. Hey, does anybody else have ideas?
Yeah.
Right? That's how strong teams function. So I think you just described such a great leadership skill right there.
And all of these things, like you mentioned, it's not like we're mentored on them, right? You kind of learn by example. So if you're lucky enough to have a mentor who leads by that example, then great. But if you don't, and I've seen a bunch of people who, may not have had that same support going through training, where it was almost like frowned upon if you ask for help. And so then they become these people who like to work on an island. But the thing is, we work in a team sport and the stakes are not just material, it's a life in front of you. And so I think really developing that deeper sense of humility and respect for other opinions is really valuable. But again, if it's not modeled for you, where would you learn it? So how do we help people learn these things, or is it even teachable?
I think a lot of it is modeling, but I think the other thing is that leadership training isn't really built into medical education at all. I don't know if it is now, but at least when I went to medical school and did residency and fellowship, I don't think I had a single class on leadership or leading a team, which is ironic because everything we do in medicine is team-based, it's interdisciplinary. So I think that's something that really needs to be part of the curriculum, and I hope that now medical schools are making it part of that curriculum, but I think that's crucial. You can know all the medicine, the science, the data, the recent publications, but to actually create change and to get your entire team on board, you need that soft skill.
I think that's a really great point, because leadership is pretty much the backbone of how we show up in medicine. And I think everybody can be some form of a leader within their own ecosystem in medicine, but even in the larger picture of life, right?
Yeah.
And it's also about taking on that responsibility of, this is how I want to show up in the world. This is how I want to create a safe space for the people coming into this cath lab or this ICU or whatever environment you're in. And it's something I learned in yoga teacher training about, creating a space. Like you're basically creating a container that feels safe. And I think we kind of already do that, but the things that I learned when I was there in that teaching environment, it was just really cool because it's like we're kind of already doing it, but why don't we talk about it this way of like, clearing the energy of the space, whatever that looks like for you. If that's talking to yourself before you walk in, if that's finding stillness, if it's kind of optimizing the environment that you're in. And then the other part of it is really like getting into sync with your team, like creating safety and space for other people to kind of drop into the zone. And when you do it right, it's almost like you're in a deep state of meditation, which is super cool. And you're just plugged in and everybody's doing what they need to do.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Because what you do is just so time sensitive, right? When you take care of STEMIs, which for the audience are the most severe type of heart attack, it's so time sensitive, right? You have 90 minutes to open that lesion and to get the patient stable. Do you have some sort of meditative practice, maybe perhaps relating to the yoga practice, that you do either before or after that kind of helps you kind of get in the zone?
I do. And
I'm just curious.
I love that question because I feel like we don't talk about that either. It's like, how do you prep as an interventional cardiologist about to scrub into
Yeah.
a case?
Yeah.
And for me, when I was in fellowship, I noticed that when I just did a little bit of like a self-talk mantra kind of thing in my head, the cases seemed to go better. And I thought it was just superstitious and kind of voodoo. And I was like, whatever, it's not a big deal. And as I became an attending, I kind of made it a point of doing it because it helped me in some way. And now I consistently will have a couple sentences that I say in my head, and it's really asking for guidance and help. And everybody has their own beliefs about what the bigger picture of whatever the source is. And for me, I'm not a very religious person. I grew up in a very religious family, and I almost kind of moved completely away from that. But what I've noticed in cases is that sometimes I'm in such a deep state of connection, almost meditative, that I feel like I'm plugged into whatever that universal source of energy is. And every time I trust it, things go well.
Hmm.
And so now, before I go into a case, I just say, whoever is here guiding me, helping this patient, please help us do everything that we possibly can to result in the best possible outcome for the patient, for everyone involved, for, all of
Yeah.
humanity. And that's it.
Yeah.
And it's
It's
kind of funny to
incredible.
say it out loud because I've never said it out loud, but it's really about wishing good. And I didn't realize that the words were so powerful until I went to, again, yoga teacher training. And they were talking about this Japanese study where they looked at the structure of water under a microscope. And they had water that received positive words, so positive energy, positive vibration. And the structure of that water was drastically different than people who spoke negative words to the same water. And it just shows you like our bodies are composed of water. We're made of the
Yeah.
earth. We're made of all of these
Yeah.
elements. And so would it be possible that we actually can effect impactful, meaningful, positive change by just sharing positive thoughts and words?
Yeah. It's like we're changing our physiology just by
Yeah.
the affirmation,
Yeah.
which is incredible.
And the whole idea of like epigenetics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Epigenetic expression. And they say you hold on to 7 generations of ancestors within you.
Is that
And
what they say? 7
yeah.
years? Wow.
Yeah, so 7 generations. And, I think about it now, and it's like the things that I get triggered by or that I'm afraid of oftentimes feel like they are some things that can be traced back to my ancestry because I have no reason to worry about material safety in this lifetime, right? I'm in a very fortunate position, but I still hold that very deep within me. It's like in the core.
Yeah. Yeah. Epigenetics, just how our genetics play with our lifestyle and our feelings and our emotions. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, it
Um,
is. Have you ever dabbled in that space? Because you deal with a lot of life and death, like really big experiences with people. Do you have any thoughts on, because I know you get clinical intuition. I know you get that hunch of what the right thing to do
Yeah.
is. Can you tell me about your experience with that?
I think there's a lot of gray areas in medicine, right? There's a lot of areas that are black and white. There's class 1 indications for, there's a lot of data. There's a lot of gray areas where I think if you polled 100 cardiologists, 50 would do one thing, 50 would do another. And I think in those gray areas, your clinical intuition and your gut feeling is so important. And I think that's the art of medicine, right? And I think that's where sort of there's a little bit of creativity in how you approach that situation, how you think about it critically. And I think that's where my intuition comes in, that those gray areas, those questions, those clinical questions that don't have black and white answers.
Where do you think it comes from?
I think it comes from experience, But some of it is a gut feeling, and that's the only way I know how to explain it. It's a gut feeling.
I feel the same way because I've taken care of patients where I've never seen that problem before, but the intuition comes in strong and I'm like, okay, let's go. And it works out. And I've never seen it before. So it's like, I do believe some of it is the pattern recognition. And I think there is a phenomenon that, our body kind of knows before our thinking mind can catch up. Some of it is nervous system, but some of it is just like, it just pops up and you're just kind of like, okay, cool, let's go with it.
Yeah. Yeah. But some of those decisions, if you asked for the data to back it up, there may not be data.
Yeah.
Right? That's the interesting part.
I actually have never asked you this question, Rosie. So you've dealt with really sick patients and oftentimes end of life. Some people that think they're end of life, but actually have a turn for the better. Are there any consistent themes of things that these patients share with you?
The number one thing is I have a second lease on life. I think that's the number one thing, right? When sometimes they don't even realize how sick they were, right? They were on medications for sedation, they were intubated, they were in essentially effectively a comatose state. And then when they make that turnaround and they, come back to sort of a functional life or come to, I think they feel like they have a second lease on life.
Wow. Does that change how you show up in your own life?
Yeah. I think when you take care of life or death situations, it changes the way you see life, right? Because every moment is precious. Your energy is precious. Your time is precious. You don't know how much runway you have left in life. You don't know. You were talking about a diagonal and a VF arrest. You just don't know, right? You hope you have a long, healthy life, but you just don't know. And so you got to live in the present. I think that's the number one thing I take away from my critical care world into my personal life, that life is unpredictable, health is unpredictable, and you got to live each moment.
Speaking of living each moment, there are some topics that are kind of taboo, right, in medicine. As a woman in her 30s, for me specifically, it's just like talking about things like relationships and how do you navigate being present in your own life when you're so busy, right?
Yeah.
I really struggle with that because for me, it was a question of, okay, so how do I make my own life work? How do I make my personal life make sense? How do I form deep connections with people outside of work and not let it be a trauma bond? And yeah, no, for real though, like I
Yeah.
think most of the
Yeah.
people I ever dated, it was trauma bonding. And then even the question of like freezing eggs, that kind of stuff. Because I mean, these are all very practical realities.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts in that space because most
Yeah.
people don't have a friend like Rosie Thatchell.
You're gonna make my head big.
You don't have to worry about being overconfident.
I think with friendships and relationships outside of work, I think our jobs are extremely busy, extremely demanding, right? They're physically demanding, they're emotionally demanding. You come home and you have compassion fatigue. So I feel like I need my personal relationships to be easy, right? And so the friendships that are understanding, they're compassionate, they don't feel like work. Even if there's conflict, it's short-lived. I think those relationships are the ones that have staying power for me. I think any friendship where I feel like, this is work, or there's an ounce of negativity, I think it doesn't work for me because we have stressful careers to begin with. We want to go home and be able to compartmentalize and enter a safe space. So I think friendships that feel easy, they feel safe. There's compassion on both sides. Like, the number of times I've ran late or I've missed something and you've always showed me compassion, right? I think that's not something I would necessarily get from everyone. Of course, we have the understanding that we're both professionals and busy and we get it, right? But not everyone is that compassionate. And I think having people like that in your life just makes those personal relationships easier.
And also having the compassion for self.
Yeah.
Why are we so hard on
Mhm.
ourselves if we're 10 minutes late to
Yeah.
a dinner after being
Yeah.
in the cath lab or in the ICU for 12
Yeah.
straight hours?
Yeah.
And that's something that I've really had to actively work on. It's extending the same compassion that I give to other people, also to myself, and understanding that we're all made of the same stuff, right? And I think we tend to be overgivers, people pleasers, and have all these things that are kind of celebrated as positive qualities. But at the end of the day, like we have that same inherent value. And for us to show up fully for another person, we have to have that own nurturing within ourselves.
Yeah. I think that's hard. I think it's so hard because inherently I feel guilty.
Why?
Even if I'm
Actually, I do
sick
too.
and I take a day off from work, I feel guilty.
Yeah.
I feel guilty that work is going to someone else. I feel guilty that I didn't show up for the patient. I just feel guilty. It's crazy. Even now, I still feel guilty about it.
Is it because we built a system that is not sustainable, you think? Or what do you think it is that creates that guilt?
Yeah, I think some of it is the sustainability of the system. There's not enough redundancy in staffing, things like that. But I think some of it is we are in a profession, a vocation, if you will, where others come before ourselves, right? Our patients come before ourselves. Our patients sometimes come before our own family, right? So I think it's inherent to the profession to think like that, but you got to take care of the healer too, right? If we can't take care of ourselves, we can't give our best to our patients, our friends, our family. But it's something I constantly struggle with even now.
This is something I really
Yeah.
learned from the spiritual community
Hmm.
because I think they understand the value of the healer being whole before they show up to help another person. It's almost like fasten your own seatbelt before you fasten somebody else's.
Yeah.
Is it seatbelt or air mask?
I think it's put your own oxygen mask first, like the airplane analogy, right? Before you put somebody else's on. But you know what? Seatbelt works too. The seatbelt's important too.
Thank you. And see, you're extending compassion to me, and I will do the same to myself. But it is that principle of if you can't be the complete version of yourself, are you really doing your best for the patient? And I think we kind of got it a little bit twisted in medicine where it's almost like applauded for you to completely deplete yourself to the point where you're anxious about showing up the next day and taking on the tasks of the day because you're like, I'm so sleep deprived or I'm so tired. I think we've gotten to such an extreme with that like, are we really helping anyone by pushing
Yeah.
ourselves to that? And we talk a lot about actually the longevity of our careers. How long will we show up to do this work? How much impact will we have over a lifetime versus burning ourselves to the ground in 3 to 5 years? What are your thoughts on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking about this last
Yeah.
night, right? I think burnout is not a badge of honor, right? And I also think there's so many ways to practice medicine and to create impact in this world in healthcare, as well as other industries. And I think it's great that we're exploring that, right? Um, some people want to be 100% clinical, 100% academic, 100% private practice. Some people want to dabble in business or entrepreneurship or podcasting or walking the runway, which you got to talk about, right? But all of those things, there's a space for. And the way I see it, if you live in alignment with what you're meant to do, that means the longevity of your clinical career, it'll be longer, right? I think it's more important now than ever because every other day there's a statistic about how physicians are burnt out. Physicians are leaving clinical medicine. I think it's like half of med students intend on practicing clinical medicine. Burnout. So all of these things, one of the mitigating things may be maybe we don't do 100% clinical, but you dabble in something that brings you joy on the side that actually augments your clinical career, right? Because if you're whole and living in your purpose, you bring that to your patients and to your clinical care too. So I think encouraging people to sort of pursue their true passions and not just whatever playbook your training has told you you need to take. I think that's really, really important for the longevity of our profession as well.
I really love hearing that from someone like you with your unique expertise because you also have the background in business and, in your administrative functions and all these other experiences you've had to really understand what it takes to make the system run.
Yeah.
How do we fix it? Is it fixable?
Hmm.
This problem that we
Yeah,
see because
so that
can't
could be like a 2-hour podcast
we'll have to do a
episode.
part 2 with that, but if you have
Um,
like kind of a big picture
yeah,
overview.
I think healthcare is such an interesting industry and it's unique because you have a profession that's essentially a vocation. There's an altruistic element to it, right? Yet healthcare is also a business. So how do you balance purpose and mission with profit? And we know healthcare has become more corporatized, and that's not necessarily all bad. There's pros and cons to it because I think when you corporatize, you create structure, you create scale, you create more resources and money, all of which can be good things. But the incentives need to be aligned so that it serves the ultimate, you know, consumer in the system, which is the patient, right? So I think we have a system where incentives are misaligned. And so the profits don't feed the purpose, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have. And I think that's our challenge to solve as physicians, as healthcare leaders, as consumers of medicine as well. And I think it's going to be a multi-pronged approach, right? We need policy to be in place, we need incentives to be aligned, we need physicians, patients, everybody to sort of come together to change the system. I don't think there's a single fix. Have you read Indira Nooyi's memoir?
No, but I'm going to if you
Oh,
recommend it.
she's I have such a girl crush on her. She's just inspirational to watch. There's some interviews, and she's so eloquent. But her memoir, she was a previous chairperson for PepsiCo,
Right.
which of course isn't known for being the most healthy sort of company previously, at least. But she had a program she started called, I believe it was called Performance with Purpose. And the idea was to create healthier drinks, be more sustainable. And interestingly, that actually drove profit for the company. So I think there's something to be learned from that they don't have to be mutually exclusive, profits and purpose. So if we can realign our healthcare system so that profits actually serve the people who need the healthcare system, I think that's probably where we should be headed.
I think there's a lot of skepticism, right? I think there's a lot of mistrust among clinicians, among patients and clinicians, among clinicians, administration. I think there's been a lot of big cultural challenges that we face in medicine. And, when I was in my corporate practice, I could see areas where I really wanted to change something. So in terms of how we structured a program to make it safer for patients, how we distribute responsibility so that there's somebody physically available to manage really sick patients that are on mechanical circulatory support. And for me, it seemed like really simple things that I learned from, where I trained at a big institution. But for the system, they were so resistant to change, even though the consequence would actually be better patient care. And that was the kind of driving principle behind all of it. But I think people also tend to have a skepticism of what they don't know.
Yeah.
How do we approach something like that?
So I think we need more people that speak the language of medicine, but also business and leadership.
Thank God you exist.
You're so sweet.
No, I really feel like this is your flow state. Like just hearing you talk about what you know in that space,
Yeah.
it just feels like you have aligned with your purpose and you're using your potential to the fullest.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope to.
So inspired. When are you going to write a book?
Oh gosh. I don't know. Who would read it?
I will read it.
Well, you would?
Open Heart will read it. We're all here.
You'll be my only reader.
No. And see, that's the same thing. Like your story is incredible. And I think so many people have these incredible personal stories, but we minimize them. Why do we do that?
I think it's the way we're socialized. I think I was raised to be humble, so I still feel very uncomfortable sharing not just my opinions, but sometimes my wins. Actually, that's why I started social media, because I would be really uncomfortable walking into a room or department and being like, I published this or I did this. But I felt like social media was less intimidating, so I could put it out there and people can see.
Yeah.
But I felt weird self-promoting in person, but not online. Isn't that kind of strange?
But at the end of the day, is it even self-promotion? Because you're basically trying to change the healthcare ecosystem to make it safer and better for everyone involved. So
It's not, but it feels that way sometimes, right? Where it's like,
that's
oh,
the
I want to
challenge.
share something I did or I accomplished, but it feels weird to say that out loud.
I know what you mean. And, that was part of my struggle with sharing more openly too, because you kind of doubt, you're like, is this even going to help anybody or
Yeah.
does this make sense? But
Yeah.
that's why I feel like if there's something within us that keeps pulling us in a certain direction, I just feel like it's so important to just go for it because we just never know the full extent of the ripple. And that's what I love about you. It's like you are just on your path and in your purpose. And I just know whatever it is that you do, it's going to impact all of us in a really meaningful way.
I hope so. You're so inspirational.
You are inspirational. Can you give me your best cardiology pickup line?
Ooh, there's quite a few. You make me tachycardic.
Uh-huh.
You give me palpitations. You broke my heart. Can you fix it?
Have you ever had somebody like come in with like, oh, you've given me taco subo because you broke my heart?
I've gotten that online before. I've never gotten it. I've never gotten it in person because I feel like these are so tacky to say in person. Most of them come virtually, which I think is really interesting. Wait, I'm sure you've had a few
You know,
interesting ones.
I usually just have people tell me about their atrial fibrillation. I don't know. It's like a thing. It's like anytime I'm out in the world, people are like, hey, you.
It's so funny. I've had a few Uber drivers. If I share with them I'm a cardiologist, they tell me about their coronary disease or their atrial fibrillation or other medical ailments. I just think it's interesting.
It's super interesting. And I actually don't mind it. It's just more like, I don't know, because it's like the setting. Sometimes I'm like in a pool and it's just like a random person
Yeah.
will come up to you and just
Yeah.
be like, hey, so I've had AFib for 6 years and I'm on these medications.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like, okay, cool.
But it's also interesting because these random interactions, sometimes they're with strangers,
Yeah,
they instantly trust you and tell you everything.
it is wild.
And I'm always like, I could have made everything up. I could be not a cardiologist, yet you've suddenly trusted me with all of this personal,
Yeah.
intimate information. And it's really like humbling in
This
a
is
way.
actually like full circle back to the beginning of this conversation where I think that trust is actually coming from a place of resonance. The spiritual world believes in the energy body. It's like we generate an electromagnetic field that happens with each heartbeat, and it's kind of scientifically proven.
Yeah.
But like how these energy fields interact kind of dictates like a person's initial impression of you. So it's super interesting to think about it in that
So
sense.
interesting.
Yeah.
Do you get that too? Like an Uber driver will ask you about their medical
Oh,
ailments?
yeah. All the time. People on planes, Uber drivers, and I just feel like there's some like unspoken energetic resonance, and I feel like people pick up on it. And I think it's the same thing whenever patients come see you in the office and you may be a really good fit for the person or your energies just don't really mesh well. And so I also just don't feel like there's a one size fits all when it comes to clinicians and patients. Like I really feel like both have to be super comfortable and engaged in this dynamic because I think some of that healing is that deeper connection that you build.
Yeah. It has to be a good match on both
Yeah.
sides. I completely agree.
We don't talk about that either.
No, we
Yeah.
don't. And I think, it's you got to find the right physician for you, right? Even as a consumer, as patients ourselves, maybe this primary care doctor wasn't the right fit for me. Maybe this person is a better personality fit, right? So I think that's okay.
It's
Like
totally
I'm
okay.
never offended if a patient tells me, "Hey, I don't think this is a good fit. I want to see someone else." Like that's fine.
Yeah, and also
Yeah.
for us to say, like, there have been patients who've come to me with, problems that I'm like, "I could take care of you, but I feel like this other person is a better fit for this specific issue," and it's almost like, how do we get that ego out of the way to just know that, you don't have to be the right fit for everybody, but we can all absolutely be involved in the pathway.
Yeah. I think that you hit the nail on the head there. You've got to take the ego out of it, right? And it's about the patient at the end of the day. It's not about us. It's not about, appearances. So,
I think the final thing I'd like to kind of circle back to is this concept of deferred dreams,
mm,
because you have been so supportive of my trajectory in life. And I met you, actually, I've known you during a time, and I think we've gotten closer during a time of navigating big transitions. And your friendship and the lack of judgment and all the support that you've given me, especially because of who you are, has really helped me more fully embrace all of who I am. I cannot believe I just walked the runway for New York Fashion Week in 6-inch platform
you
heels.
have to tell us about that.
And I was shocked at how translatable our skills are. The whole time, like I was prepping using the platform heels because I've never walked in something like
Yeah.
that.
Like 6-inch heels,
6-inch
right?
heels, I literally had to go to an
Yeah.
adult store to buy them because I'm like, nobody else sells this stuff. Yeah, it's like for real. And I was practicing and I got frustrated in the beginning and I was like, I feel like I'm a first year fellow trying to get access.
Yeah.
How wild is that?
Yeah.
And then you realize that you're never going to be the expert on day one. And it's a matter of trusting and showing up and getting the help that you need, but really trusting in the process. And so it just reminded me that what I learned through my 15 years of medical training is actually applicable to other areas of life, including how to walk a runway. And when I got there, I was just like, wow, what a chaotic environment. And backstage actually reminded me of like a code blue in the
Could
ICU.
Yeah.
Can you describe what a code blue feels like just for our
So
audience?
usually that means a patient is decompensating. So you've got a code team arriving, you have the ICU team, you have compression starting, you have intubation going on, you have a whole slew of activities happening at the same time. And teamwork and communication are more important than ever. But it's also chaotic. If you're an outsider looking at the situation, it's chaotic. There's probably 20, 30 plus people there. You don't know who's doing what. People are yelling orders at each other. So it's chaotic. But it also works.
It works. And
Yeah.
I think as the leader of that code blue situation, you have to find a place of calm and center. And my mentor said it best. He was like, the most important thing for you in any situation where things are not going the direction you want them to go is to be able to just stay centered and calm and exude that calm into the room because that's what's going to keep everybody else on track.
Mhm.
The second you panic, the second you show it on your
Yeah.
face, the second you start acting crazy in there, things will just kind of, cascade into an unfavorable direction. And I felt very much like that behind the scenes of a fashion show.
Hmm.
How wild is that? But the
That's so
skills that I
interesting.
learned from
Yeah.
doing all the things in medicine was that there are certain practices that help me feel okay in that situation. And it's a lot about just kind of becoming aware of my own energy. It's like, where am I in this space? And how do I stay in my body and very present in the moment to make sure that things go the way that they need to? And it was the same thing walking the runway. It's like doing a left main bifurcation. You have to be very, very present in that moment. Precision is really important. How you show up is important.
Yeah.
Your energy, like, is this going to be a positive outcome? Like, all the
Right.
words that we speak to ourselves
Right.
matter. And it felt the same exact way going out on the runway.
I have a question. So, when you have these code situations, there's usually a code leader, and that person, their temperament is so important, right? And then organizational psychology, actually, there's this concept called emotional contagion, where if that person is stressed out, everybody will be stressed out. If that person's calm, level-headed, everybody else will be calm. And we saw that during COVID, right?
Yeah.
When that person at the top was extremely fearful or tense or sort of um, displaying, suboptimal leadership qualities that kind of filter down. But if they were calm, level-headed, vulnerable, all of these things, it kind of percolated down to the entire team. Did you feel like in the fashion world there was that equivalent, like a person that was creating that calm in the storm?
Yes. And I feel like we have to do a whole episode about that topic because what I learned from the other models is that this was not a typical fashion show. The designer, her name is Somya. She's an incredible person. She's an engineer who went to Parsons during COVID because she was looking for a creative outlet to combat burnout, and then ended up kind of making a fashion label that took off. And it's wild.
Incredible.
And her clothes tell a story, but the way that she cares for her models, she's so intentional about making sure they're comfortable with what they're wearing. They're comfortable with how people are interacting with them, that they're not pulling on their hair or messing with their face in a way that doesn't feel good to them, because she understands that the energy that that person carries onto the
Yeah.
runway
Yeah.
actually represents the clothing. But even on a deeper level, she just cares about people. And I think those things are actually such an important part of that experience, but also of the medical experience. But in the industry, it's not like that. People are often just kind of ripping things off of you. You're in a public space, just standing there naked. I mean, for
Yeah.
me, it was a new experience. I was just kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
here I am, 35-year-old interventional cardiologist. But I didn't mind it because it was like, I felt very protected by her little bubble. But yeah, I think it's not the case for a lot of people. The models were telling me horror stories about what they've experienced. And I think, medical residents will tell you horror stories about what they've experienced.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think each of the individual models also carried forward a really beautiful energy. And I'm like sitting there like mom, like pouring hot water for people because it was freezing in there. And then there's another girl who's like, hey, does anybody want snacks? And I think it is about that deeper community and connection. It's like, look out for the people around you and you'll show up better for that person that you're actually taking care of, even in medicine.
So many parallels to be drawn there, right?
I think it's in
It's
everything.
incredible.
And that's why I'm like, why do we judge ourselves for wanting to dabble in other spaces? Because I think there are translatable skills, and I think that we bring value into every environment, or it helps us grow into even better versions of ourselves when we're at the cath lab table or in the ICU.
Hmm. I also think, one of my girlfriends had sent me a reel the other day, an Insta reel. It was something about how time sort of speeds up as you get older, and I'm trying to reference the person who was speaking on this reel, but basically the nutshell version of it is that in your early life you have a lot of novel experiences, right? You're going to school, you become an adolescent, you go to college, you get your new job. Like, there's all these novel experiences built into the first 20, 30 years of your life. And then after that, there really isn't. Like, sure, you may have a milestone, maybe a professional milestone, or you get married or have a child, but there isn't a novelty built in every few years. And so I think always staying a beginner and trying new things, kind of like what you're doing here.
And be okay with not being
And
perfect.
yeah, and being okay with maybe what is perceived as a failure or failing forward. I think that kind of keeps you young and keeps you sort of enjoying those moments, right? As life goes on, because there isn't as much novelty in the latter, maybe 2/3 of your life compared to the first. So
That is such a wise piece of advice. And the thing that pops up into my head is that I always was afraid of what will other people think, or what will this look like, or will somebody laugh at me? And that's still very much a part of my inner dialogue.
yeah.
But I've learned now to just trust that inner knowing or the intuition more. And I check in with myself. I'm like, does this feel aligned? Does this feel important or meaningful? Even if I can't see how, I trust so deeply in that now that's my compass. And when I show up, it's inevitably the experience that I needed to have or that I needed to show up for in some
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So I think taking some of the judgment out of it has really helped me, and taking the pressure off of the outcome.
Mm-hmm. I also think that helps you find your tribe, right? Because the people that are going to truly support you and are open-minded are going to still be part of your life. And the people that have a problem with you coloring outside of the lines, well, maybe it wasn't meant to be.
Yeah, and it's the
So,
fear of the unknown, and it's like have compassion even for that person. It's like they can't see life in a way that expands beyond what they know. And, maybe it's part of their life path, maybe it's not, but they definitely don't have to interact with yours because your
yeah,
trajectory is onward and upward.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Final question for you.
Yeah.
What does living with an open heart mean to you?
Ooh, what a great question. Fitting for the name. I think living with an open heart to me means letting life leave its sort of fingerprints on you. So being porous enough to let the wonder of new experiences and new people, new endeavors seep into your life, right? Whether it's a new professional experience, a new country you're traveling to, a new food you're trying, keeping that wonder alive. I think to me that's living with an open heart. Um, the ability to sort of change and be changed. Um, I think that's really important as well. And living authentically and vulnerably.
What a beautiful response from a beautiful person. It's such an honor to have you here, Rosie.
Thank you so
I
much.
really feel like I've learned so much from our friendship and just even the idea of how to navigate this complex life that we live. We're both women in cardiology. We both come from similar backgrounds, but what really brought us together was that first vulnerable conversation that we shared. So thank you for
That's how our
trusting me.
friendship started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
Actually, one last thing. Is there any takeaway that you want to leave our audience with? Like one thing that just pops in?
Find your people. I think that's the one thing I would say. I think everything we do, professionally and personally, centers around impact and people. Um, you don't need a lot of good friends. You just need a few people that are in your corner, understand you, and will be rooting for you. Find your people.
I love that. Rosie, thank you so much for taking the time to be here, all the way in Fort Worth, Texas, from New York. It means so much that you're willing to share your vulnerability, your story, and showing us that deferred dreams can actually become such an important impact and ripple into the world. The other really cool thing about you is that you're able to keep a very balanced perspective about purpose and how it ties to a system that may actually be more driven by the idea of generating profit, but how do we restore that profit to then impact the community in a positive way? The fact that you have the courage to become the fullest expression of yourself gives me the same courage that I can show up fully as who I am. And the other important part that I really find fascinating about you is your ability to see that all of our skills are cumulative over a lifetime. They're translatable, they can make an impact in multiple different areas, but all it takes to start is that self-trust and knowing within ourselves. Thank you for reminding us what it means to live truly with a beginner's mind and an open heart. Until next time, this is Priya Rao, signing off.